Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope that everybody's having a very good holiday season. I wanted to make a special video directed at anyone who does not have a sword but is looking to get one in the very near future. So a special, how do I do my very first sword type of video. So Santa's come and has given you a little extra cash and you've been interested in swords for a while, but you don't know where to start. This is a question that I've fielded many, many times before. How do I buy my very first sword? So to answer that, there's a couple of things you should probably ask yourself. The first one is, what am I interested in? What am I interested in using the sword for? What's my use case? The other thing is, where am I located and what's my budget? So whenever you're asking someone else for tips on what type of sword to get, make sure you have those kind of ready to go, because that'll help direct the conversation that we're going to have. So let's look at a couple of different kind of categories. I'd say that there's probably four main types of ways you can get into sword collecting, and there are some ideas for how to approach each of them. If you're just interested in a sword for how it looks, so let's say you're interested in a sword and all you're interested in is what it looks like and how it's going to look up on the wall. So these are decorative swords. Oftentimes in the collecting community, we refer to these as wall hangers. And any type of sword can look good. You can be attracted to the aesthetics of any of them. But if you're starting your collection and you don't have a lot of cash, there are many swords that may catch your eye. And if all you're interested in is hanging it up on the wall and not bringing it down, you can pretty much go hog wild. I'm not going to give you a lot more recommendations than whatever you happen to see, whatever catches your eye. Go ahead and pick it up and put it up on the wall. If it's a metal sword that's made of stainless steel, it is probably not heat treated well in the blade. Its hilt is probably not robust enough to be used for sword-like activities. So in the business, we tend to call these sword-like objects. So the only proviso is, please do not take it down and try and use it like an actual sword, because it's not really designed to be used for a sword. This is kind of like buying a Hot Wheels car and expecting it to act like an RC car. It's still got four wheels and a windshield, but they don't have any functional equivalency to one another. So decorative swords are fine and they have a role in the collection community, but don't confuse them for any of the other swords that we are going to talk about. Now, if instead you're interested in perhaps learning swordsmanship, maybe you're interested in learning how to fence, you're really into samurai movies, kung fu movies, the Three Musketeers, something like that, and you want to start learning swordplay. You do not want to start with anything that's going to hurt yourself, anything around you, any property, etc., which means you need to start with some type of a training sword. Now, in a perfect world, you're first going to find an instructor, a club, a kendo school, a fencing group, and they will help guide you into what type of sword to find. But that's not always feasible or possible, and there's nothing to stop you from picking up something that you're interested in and playing with it at home. There's lots of training swords available to you. Many of them are synthetic and made of various types of synthetic materials, and they're going to be safe for you or anything that you accidentally crash into. And I wouldn't recommend trying to crash into anything while you're still in the learning process. There are other ones that are made of wood, like Bokudo or Boken. There are things like kendo sticks, shinai, which are made of wrapped bamboo, and they are steel trainers. So if you really want something that looks like a proper sword, there are blunt examples, which have varying degrees of edge depending on what they're used. If they're intended to be used for stage combat, if they're intended to be used for what's called Battle of the Nations or something like that, or if they're intended to be used for training, like a Federschwert for longsword fencing in a HEMA type environment. Again, it's better if you have an instructor who can give you an idea what's going to be best for you to work with, because then if all of your classmates are using a specific type of weapon, you'll be in the same boat and you'll be able to work together. But if you're planning to do drilling at home, if you're trying to follow instructions by yourself through a book or watching someone online, then having a sword that doesn't have an edge on it is going to be definitely the way to do it. And there's all sorts of specialty ones, so take a keen look at the type of fencing you're interested in and see the spectrum of tools that are available to you. Another thing that someone might be interested in is getting an actual historical antique. And antiques are certainly something that's very interesting and a way to start your collection. Unfortunately, it is one of the most difficult parts of swords to get into, just because if you don't have any experience with antiques of any kind, finding genuine antiques is going to require a lot of research on your part. Um, there are resources beyond the discussions that we have on my channel here. There are channels dedicated specifically to talking about antique swords. Those who haven't already, please make sure you check out Scholar Gladiatoria, which I'll link below. There's also my buddy at Rapier's Delight that specializes in talking about just antique models of swords, and those are good. Trying to figure out the type of sword that you're interested in will help you get there, but falling into a community where you can get into an online discussion group or a Discord group or what have you. For instance, if you're interested in Japanese swords specifically, there's lots of Nihonto collectors, and you can talk with them and get more tips on identifying specific types of swords from that period in Japan. If you're interested in Ottoman swords, like this Yatagan here, you can find folks who just want to talk about Ottoman swords, and you'll be able to better tell a genuine Ottoman sword from one that's fake. If you're interested in military swords from the 19th century, there's lots and lots of those available, and those become a little bit more affordable. Trying to find them is sometimes more difficult. It might be tempting to go looking for them on auction sites like eBay or auction houses. While you might luck into a deal, unfortunately, unless you have a lot of experience, that's a bit of a risky prospect. For your very first sword, I normally would not recommend someone try and pick up an antique that way, because it requires a lot of knowledge being able to tell a genuine item from a phony baloney item. So finding instead a reputable dealer like Terry or Matt Ford or Matthew Easton or Michael D. Long, Peter Decker from the Mandarin Mansion, any of these well-known and established dealers, even though you're not going to find a diamond in the rough and an incredible steal as far as the price is concerned, you will always know that you have good, well-sourced and well-researched items that often have the provenance attached to them, so that you can trace where the sword came from and have be reassured that what you're getting is actually what it is advertised as. So antiques are usually, well, I won't say I discourage people from starting their sword collecting with antiques. It does come with some associated risks, not the least of which is you have to know how to take care of them so they don't continue to deteriorate. And then finally, probably what the majority of folks, at least who are here on this channel, are interested in: what if they want an actual proper sword, a sharp sword, a live sword, a sword for doing test cutting? Well, there are plenty of different types of swords. There's lots of options. Where do you start? Well, there's no really right or wrong way to go about this. We are in a wonderful age where there are a lot of manufacturers out there, both mass producing them from large companies and individual smiths who are doing some really spectacular work on a kind of one-on-one, either custom or semi-custom basis, which gives you, the consumer, a lot of choices and has a lot of really great options. If you are interested in a certain type or a certain period of swordsmanship or sword or culture or time period, if you're interested in Romans period, or if you're really fascinated by Germany's history, or let's say you really like the idea of the 18th century and that's what fascinated you, you can find swords that will correspond to whatever that interest is. And there are going to be, in many cases, a selection of models available to you, ranging from the kind of humble introductory, entry-level sort of swords, all the way up to really, really fancy, high-end, kind of bespoke level of sword productions. Something to keep in mind is whatever sword you get, is in many cases not going to be your last. So the first one you get is going to be a learning process. Whatever you pick up, you're going to find out things that you like about the sword and things that you don't like about how it handles. And that's going to inform whatever you're going to pick up next time. So a lot of time people will say, oh, if I'm going to buy this katana, it needs to be the perfect katana. It needs to be the perfect length, the perfect handling, it has to have the perfect amount of decorations on it and what have you. And when they spend all of this time and effort and money into purchasing it, and then they pick it up, they realize, I wish that I had actually designed it so that it would be a little bit shorter or a little bit lighter in the hand, or had an Ito wrap that was slightly different or what have you. And all of that information then goes into informing their next purchase. So it's something to keep in mind. If this is your very first sword, expect it to be a bit of a learning process between you and the sword that you're going to have. And that's going to inform what tastes and preferences you have for your second sword and any subsequent sword that you have thereafter. If you know nothing else, you can always ask someone more experienced for recommendations. And again, your budget will factor into that very much. But the best recommendation I can have is stick with sellers and manufacturers that have a well-known reputation, and that should be very easy to come by. Again, within the YouTube community, beyond my channel, certainly for sure, there's lots of reviewers. Scalagram, my buddies Matthew Jensen, AlienTude, Kane Shen, all of which I will link below, that have tons and tons of video reviewing individual models of swords, but also that have names of manufacturers that will come up time and time again that show that they have a long history of good production, good quality assurance, and know that what they're advertising is actually what will get into your hands. So then it just becomes a matter of what is something that's going to catch your eye and what you'd like to actually contribute money towards. If you then say, but I have absolutely no budget, I can't afford, if you're saying that, you know, the minimum kind of entry price for a sword is north of $100, there's two things to consider. If your budget, if you can't reach the kind of $200 mark, and that's kind of where most swords start to become functional rather than having really big compromises in their ability to perform, then there are some options. You can find functional and cutting katana below $200, and even in some cases below $100. Last time I checked, there were some options in the United States. I think by Musha, there are some functional long katana that will cut below $100. So that's something to consider. The other thing is, if you're really just interested in cutting things in the backyard and learning the bare basics, there are things like this. This is a cold steel machete gladius, and I think it retailed for like 25 or 30 bucks. So these are somewhere in between proper swords and functional knives. So these are machete blade profile or machete blade geometries that have profiles that are like swords, and they come in a variety of shapes. So they have things like Langsmessers, Da, katana, gladius, and they usually are in the kind of sub $100 range, and they'll do fine as backyard cutters. You can use them and abuse them and get all of your kind of learning experiences out of the way, because when you're first learning how to cut and you're messing up your edge alignment and you're over swinging and putting your blade into a rock or something like that, it can be kind of painful that first few times that you do that with a nice, $400 or $500 sword. If you do that with a $25 blade, then it's a lot less painful, and the experience doesn't sting quite as much. So that's something to consider, is perhaps starting with a less expensive machete of some kind, just to get in the just to get a little experience of what it's like to do backyard cutting, if that's all that you're interested in, if you're not studying a particular type of swordsmanship. I am happy to field any specific questions, so if you have a question about a specific model of sword or have something that you just are curious about swords in general, feel free to leave it in the comment below. But if not, then we will see you in the new year. I hope that everyone has a very Merry Christmas, and we will see you next time. Take care.